صباح الخير طلابنا وطالباتنا الأعزاء. اليوم رح نشرح الجزء الأخير من درسنا Relative Clauses، وهو بعنوان Defining and Non-Defining Relative Clauses. خلينا بشكل سريع نذكركم بالأجزاء اللي شرحناها من قبل. We explained what a clause is, types of clauses, dependent and independent, وشرحنا relative pronouns and the use of each one. And also we explained when is it possible to drop a relative pronoun. امتى بقدر اشيل الريلاتيف pronoun. طبعا اذا كان بيعرف a subject in the sentence ضروري استخدمه، واذا كان بيعرف an object in the sentence بقدر احذفه واقول الجمله بدونه. And also we explained relative adverbs where, when and why بفيديو مفصل، وحلينا بعض اوراق العمل. Okay. Today we are going to be talking about defining versus non-defining of relative clauses. So let's get started for our topic today. First, let's define what a relative clause is. A relative clause adds relatively important information about the subject or object of the sentence. It gives important information. The clause gives important information about the subject or object, and usually placed immediately after the noun to which they refer. The clause, I mean, is immediately placed after the noun to which they refer. And a relative clause is introduced by a relative pronoun or adverb. Look at this example sentence. The people were very nice. We visited them yesterday. Let's join both sentences with a suitable relative pronoun. فرح تصير الجملة the people whom we visited yesterday were very nice. We have two sentences. We want to define people because them in the second sentence refers to the people. Is people subject or object in the sentence? It is the object, because in the second sentence, them refers to people, so it is an object pronoun, and we in the second sentence is the subject. So we say we visited the people. لازم نحذف الضمير them بالجملة الثانية لأنه عائد على النون يلي احنا بدنا نعرفه وهو people. إذا رح نحذف them. طالما رح نعرف people ونعطي عنها معلومات أكثر لازم relative pronoun يكون مباشرة بعد people. أوكي، why whom W-H-O-M؟ لأنه whom بتعرف an object. نقدر برضو نستخدم who W-H-O لأنه هو بتعرف subject and object. So the relative clause whom we visited yesterday لازم يبدأ ب relative pronoun. Look at the sentence, it is underlined. The relative clause whom we visited yesterday بدأ ب relative pronoun whom. إذا بنقول whom we visited yesterday هو relative clause. اوكي، خلينا هلا نشرح انواع relative clauses. عندنا نوعين defining and non-defining. What is a defining relative clause؟ بدنا نعرف هلا شو defining relative clause مع أمثلة. A defining relative clause provides important information to identify the subject or object of a sentence. So it gives a defining relative clause gives important information. And without this clause, the sentence completely changes its meaning. And the defining relative clause always comes immediately after the subject or object. The clause comes immediately after the subject or object and introduced by a relative pronoun. نبدأ ب relative clauses of the subject ودرسناهم من قبل. For a person we use who or that, and for things we use which or that. Let's see some examples. The man who is talking to Anne is my math teacher, and the book which was published last year would be perfect for your exam. Be careful, we said that if the noun is a person, we use the relative pronoun who or that, and if it is a thing, we use which or that. In the first sentence, the man who is talking to Anne is my math teacher. You can see how the information in the clause, طبعا the clause who is talking to Anne, and starts with who. لازم يبدأ ب relative pronoun. The clause كامل who is talking to Anne وبلش ب who the relative pronoun. So how the information in the clause is essential. If you say the man is my math teacher, which man? A relative clause which is underlined is very important to define the man. Who is talking to Anne تعطيكي معلومات أكتر أو بتعطي معلومات أكتر عشان أعرف the man. So it is very important and essential in the sentence عشان أعرف the man. Because as I said, we don't know which man the person is talking about unless we say who is talking to Anne. Otherwise, it could be any man, we don't know. And the same goes for the book in the second sentence. The book which was published last year would be perfect for your exam. Which was published last year is the relative clause وبلش ب which, the relative pronoun حتى أعرف the book. If you say the book would be perfect for your exam, يبقى الجملة مش واضحة. Which book? فلازم أكمل بالrelative clause. So the relative clause which was published last year is very important and essential حتى أعرف the book. يبقى لازم أقول الجملة كاملة مع relative clause. The book which was published last year would be perfect for your exam. فملاحظين ان بهدول المثالين انه ما في فواصل للrelative clauses لانه relative clause is very important and gives essential information حتى اعرف الnoun يلي قبله. يعني the man who is talking to Anne is my math teacher without commas. ما في comma قبل the relative clause ولا بعد the relative clause because the relative clause is important مثل ما قلنا. The book which was published last year ما في commas قبل which ولا بنهاية الclause بعد year لأنه this relative clause gives important information حتى أعرف the book in the sentence. درسنا بالفيديوهات اللي قبل برضو relative clauses of the object. Also for a person we use who, whom and that. لكن هم حيعرفوا هون هلا object. For things we use which or that. Let's look at these two examples. The girl who or whom you met this morning is my cousin. The girl. بدنا نعرف the girl. So حستخدم relative pronoun مباشرة بعد the girl. The girl who or whom. Whom to define an object pronoun. You met the girl. You met the girl. So you is the subject and the girl يلي احنا بدنا نعرفها هي الobject. So it's okay to use whom لأن بستخدم whom for object pronouns. And it's okay to use who لأنه هو مثل ما شرحنا بالفيديو السابق بتعرف subject and object. Who or whom you met this morning is the relative clause. Okay, هلا هل بصير أشيل relative clause whom you met this morning وأقول the girl is my cousin? If you say the girl is my cousin يبقى الجملة مش واضحة. يبقى relative clause whom you met this morning is very important and essential حتى أعرف the girl. فيبقى relative clause in this sentence ما بستخدم له commas أبدا ما فيش فواصل لأنه it's very important. The book which I am reading is absolutely wonderful. بدي أعرف the book, so we use the relative pronoun which. Okay, which represents a subject or object pronoun. I am reading the book. I is the subject, يبقى the book is the object. So which عم بتعرف object. A relative clause which I am reading. Okay, if you leave this clause, if you leave it, if you omit or delete this clause and say the book is absolutely wonderful. Which book? يبقى المعلومة ناقصة ومش واضحة. So you have to use the relative clause. You have to say the relative clause which I am reading لأنها معلومة مهمة حتى تعرف which book. Also we studied the possessive relative clause whose. انتبهوا whose W-H-O-S-E. It's not apostrophe S. W-H-O-S-E وهي عشان تعرف ملكية possessive. Look at this sentence. I have a friend whose dog won a prize in a competition. Whose dog won a prize in a competition is the relative clause, and you can see that it is underlined. Whose the dog belongs to the friend. فيبقى في بهاي الجملة زي ما قلنا ملكية. The friend's dog. So I have a friend whose dog won a prize in a competition. If you say I have a friend وخلاص to ignore the relative clause، يبقى لو بدي أحذف the relative clause whose dog won a prize in a competition، المعلومة ناقصة وما بتعطيكي معلومات كافية عن the friend. So you have to use it. I have a friend whose dog, which friend whose dog won a prize in a competition. So this relative clause is essential to define the friend in the sentence. So now let's go to non-defining relative clauses وهو النوع الثاني. بس خلينا أذكركم مرة ثانية the defining relative clause. Defining relative clauses are essential to maintain the meaning of the sentence. Okay, now what is a non-defining relative clause? A non-defining relative clause provides additional information. Additional information يعني extra information about the subject or object of the sentence that is not essential, not important to identify them. And a non-defining relative clause doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. So you can include it, but it's not essential. And without it, you can still understand the meaning of the sentence. And the clause is separated by commas. So we have to use commas. بنوع non-defining relative clause لازم نستخدم commas. We don't use that. It's not possible to use that. بنوع defining relative clauses استبدلنا who which بذات. non-defining relative clauses we cannot use that. Be careful. We use a proper noun يعني نستخدم اسم علم واضح in the sentence sometimes طبعا. In a non-defining clause the relative pronoun must always be used. بنوع defining كنا نقول relative pronoun إذا كان عم بيعرف object you can omit it يعني ممكن تحذفه وتقول الجملة بدونه. non-defining relative clause يعني this type the relative pronoun must always be used. ضروري أستخدم relative pronoun وما بقدر أشطبه. Okay, let's look at some examples about non-defining relative clauses. We have 3 examples. I'm going to start with the last one, King Hussein, لأنه كتير واضح كمثال. King Hussein, comma, who died in 1999, comma, was king of Jordan. Okay, the relative clause is underlined. Who died in 1999. And you can notice that there is a comma before at the beginning of the clause and another comma at the end of the clause. في فاصلة ببداية the clause وفاصلة بنهاية the clause. Okay, why to use commas? If you say King Hussein was king of Jordan. إذا قلنا King Hussein was king of Jordan طبعا واضحة الجملة ومعروف أنا مين عم بعرف عن مين عم بحكي. King Hussein was king of Jordan. واضحة الجملة والمعلومة كافية. أما who died in 1999 بعتبرها extra information عن King Hussein. So relative clause هذا لأنه extra information about King Hussein راح أحطه between commas. الكومة الأولى the first comma is at the beginning of the clause حتكون قبل relative pronoun. والكومة الثانية الفاصلة الثانية حتكون بنهاية the clause. Okay. Look at the first sentence. Mary, who was my classmate, graduated last year. If you say Mary is a proper noun. اسم علم معروف يعني إذا أنا قلت Mary graduated last year معروف عن مين عم بحكي. عم بحكي عن Mary. وأكيد الشخص فاهم أنا تماماً إنه عم نحكي عن Mary. Mary graduated last year هي جملة كافية والمعلومة فيها واضحة تماماً. What about who was my classmate? Who was my classmate? هذا relative clause هو giving extra information about Mary. فطالما هو بيعطي معلومات إضافية عشان أعرف Mary So you have to put this relative clause between commas. الكومة الأولى before the relative pronoun who, والكومة الثانية بنهاية the clause. Again, if we say Mary graduated last year, the sentence is complete ومعنى الجملة كامل وواضحة. Who was my classmate is extra information about Mary, وهذا النوع بسميه non-defining relative clause. Okay. Judy, whose children are still going to school, is a young and dynamic lady. Whose children are still going to school is the relative clause. Okay, Judy is also a proper noun. اسم علم. طالما أنا بقول Judy is a young and dynamic lady، معروف عن مين عم بحكي، والشخص الثاني أكيد حيكون فاهم علي تماماً إني أنا عم بحكي عن Judy. So to define Judy, we say Judy, whose children are still going to school, is a young and dynamic lady. Whose children, whose is a possessive relative pronoun. Whose children كأنها her children. Okay, ففيها ملكية. So that's why we use whose, W-H-O-S-E. Whose children are still going to school is extra information about Judy. فهذا relative clause راح أحطه between commas. Again, the first comma is at the beginning of the clause قبل whose, and the second comma is at the end of the clause. هلا إذا شلنا الclause whose children are still going to school, the sentence is still meaningful and complete. راح أفهم الجملة وحتكون الجملة واضحة تماما بدون هذا الclause. وبرضه this is another example about non-defining relative clause. Okay, now let's have a look at this worksheet. Here we have many objectives you have to recognize. Number one, join each pair of sentences using a relative pronoun, a suitable relative pronoun. Number two, use commas if necessary. In a defining relative clause, no commas, we don't use commas. In a non-defining relative clause, we use commas. Number three, use a relative pronoun only if you need to. We can omit the relative pronoun if it defines an object only. Number one, she put on the clothes. She had bought them the day before. Let's join both sentences with a suitable relative pronoun. She put on the clothes. She had bought them. Them refers to the clothes. So we want to define the clothes. She had bought them. She had bought the clothes. She is the subject. So the clothes is the object. So we want to define the clothes, which is the object. The sentence becomes, she put on the clothes which she had bought the day before. We want to define the clothes, so we use the relative pronoun which to define the clothes. And you have to delete them. لازم أشطب them لأنه خلاص استخدمت the clothes. So she put on the clothes which she had bought the day before. Which she had bought the day before is the relative clause. Now, which is defining an object. So you can omit which, and you can say in the second sentence, she put on the clothes she had bought the day before. So it's possible to delete which لأنها عم بتعرف object which is the clothes. And this type is defining. No commas are used because the relative clause is essential. كيف عرفنا إنه relative clause is essential? The relative clause which she had bought the day before. If you say she put on the clothes and you stop, خلاص. And you delete which she had bought the day before. This is not enough information to define the clothes. Which clothes? So you have to complete the sentence with the relative clause. Isn't the relative clause which she had bought the day before is very important to define the clothes. هذا relative clause مهم جدا حتى أعرف clothes. Again, if you say she put on the clothes ووقفنا خلاص وبدون relative clause, this is not enough information حتى أعرف the clothes, فلازم أكمل ب relative clause كامل. okay. No commas طبعا لأنه the relative clause is important to define the clothes فما بستخدمش comma و this type is defining. The second sentence, I wanted to see the man. He owned the restaurant. Who owns the restaurant? The man. So he refers to the man. So it is a subject. Now let's join these two sentences with a relative pronoun which is suitable to define the man. I wanted to see the man who owned, شطبنا he, واستخدمنا محل he, who, WHO, who owned the restaurant. Who is defining a subject, therefore we cannot omit the relative pronoun who. إذن who ضرورية. هلا هل relative clause كامل important to define the clause? If you say I wanted to see the man and you stop which man فيبقى المعلومة ناقصة. So you have to give more information to define the man. فيبقى لازم أكمل بالrelative clause who owned the restaurant. This is defining. طالما defining no commas. Don't use commas لأن relative clause is important in this sentence فما بفصله بفواصل. Now 3, that's the boy, my brother plays basketball with him. That's the boy, my brother plays basketball with him. We want to define the boy because him refers to the boy in the second sentence. So you have to delete him, بشطب him. يلا, let's join these two sentences with a suitable relative pronoun. The sentence becomes, that's the boy whom my brother plays basketball with. We deleted him and we used whom, W-H-O-M, to define the boy. Why whom? Because whom defines an object. My brother is the subject, so the boy in this sentence is the object. That's why we used whom, W-H-O-M. Okay, can we delete whom? هل بقدر أقول الجملة بدون whom? Let's see. That's the boy my brother plays basketball with. Yes, it's possible to delete the relative pronoun whom because it defines an object. إمتى بقدر أحذف relative pronoun؟ فقط إذا عم بعرف an object. The boy is an object. Okay, this type is defining. So no commas used. Look at the relative clause. Who my brother plays basketball with. If you say that's the boy, which boy? So we need the rest of the information. So we need the relative clause to define the boy. Therefore, we use it and say that's the boy whom my brother plays basketball with. So this type is defining because the relative clause is important to define the boy and we don't use commas. In number 4, those are the shoes. I cleaned them for you. I cleaned what? The shoes. We want to define the shoes. So you have to omit them, delete them because it refers to shoes. I cleaned the shoes. I is the subject. So the shoes is the object. We want to define an object. So we say those are the shoes which I cleaned for you. Be careful, we deleted them. Which, because we are defining shoes, something which I cleaned for you. Here, which is defining an object, so you can leave out which and say the sentence without which. You can say those are the shoes I cleaned for you. So it's possible to omit the relative pronoun which here. Is this defining or non-defining? Is the clause which I cleaned for you defining or non-defining? It is defining. Why defining? Because if you say those are the shoes and you stop, this is not complete information to define the shoes. So we need the relative clause which I cleaned for you to define the shoes. If a relative clause which I cleaned for you is very important to define the shoes. This type is defining. يبقى ما بستخدم commas in this sentence. In number 5, Fritz, his name is Fritz, lives in the house round the corner. It has a red front door. What has a red front door? the house round the corner. So we want to define the house was round the corner. You have to delete it because it refers to the house round the corner. Let's join both sentences with a suitable relative pronoun. Fritz lives in the house round the corner. بدي أعرف the house round the corner. Okay, so we use which has وشطبنا it. You have to delete it. Which has a red front door. Okay, here, if you say Fritz lives in the house round the corner and you stop, يعني إذا وقفنا لهون and we say Fritz lives in the house round the corner, I think this information is enough to define Fritz's house. المعلومة كافية حتى أعرف the house which is round the corner. أما which has a red front door is extra information about the house which is round the corner. طالما هي extra information for the first sentence بفصلها بكوما. So الكوما المفروض تكون قبل the relative pronoun which. يعني كأنه which has a red front door, it's possible to delete it. If you say the sentence without it, without the relative clause, إذا قلنا Fritz lives in the house round the corner فهي خلاص معلومة كافية والشخص اللي قدامي فهم علي تماما أنا شو بقول. So this type is non-defining. That's why we used a comma, which has a red front door. لاحظوا إنه the relative clause in this sentence هو مش بالوسط. It's in the end of the sentence. Okay, number 6, Jackie refused to go to the concert with me. She hates country music. She refers to Jackie. Okay, Jackie, we want to define Jackie. Jackie, who hates country music. Who is immediately after Jackie. لازم أحط relative pronoun مباشرة بعد the person or something we want to define. So Jackie, who على طول who hates country music, refused to go to the concert with me. Okay, the relative clause is who hates country music. If you omit this clause, إذا شلنا الclause كامل and saying Jackie refused to go to the concert with me, the sentence is complete. It is meaningful. أما who hates country music هي extra information about Jackie, معلومات إضافية. If you leave it, if you leave the relative clause, the sentence still has its meaning and it is a complete sentence. فهلا شو بنعمل بالrelative clause? You have to put it between commas. The first comma is before the relative pronoun and the second comma is in the end of the clause. Look at refused. Refused is a verb. So this type is non-defining and you have to use commas. Okay. إن شاء الله نكون هيك قدرنا نفرق شوي بين أنواع relative clauses defining and non-defining من خلال this worksheet إن شاء الله. هلأ إن شاء الله بالفيديوهات القادمة ممكن نحضر worksheet تانية بس هي تكون كهوم work لإلكم وتجربوا أنتوا تحلوها. Thank you so much.